Moriden Athluan.
The champion of Kinneret. Moriden showed the beauty of nature by finding renewal for the great and glorious Gildergreen of Whiterun, providing a place of worship for all manner of men and mer.
The champion of Daibella, the only man to enter the most sacred places of the temple in Markat and live. He, who found out the Daibellian symbol and returned her to the temple, so that all could hear the will of the great goddess.
The messenger of Mara, whose small words and influence sparked two of the greatest love stories of all time in Skyrim.
Moriden was at the height of his goodly deeds when word reached him of a new threat to Skyrim and its people.
Like the mighty champion of the people he had become, he looked up to the role of the people's champion once again and set off to destroy the vampire threat.
Come closer and hear the story of how he destroyed one of the oldest threats to
Still
man
searching
and
for stories about me, I see. I hate to disappoint you, but this portion of my story, you won't find a single bard who knows what he's talking about. That's fine now. We have time, my friend. I can tell it far better than they can, as they tell it for entertainment, not because it is truth. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. Eleven Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. Dragon's Tooth Crater was everything it should have been. It had the Forge Master's fingers, it had a word wall with the word air, part of a shout called Elemental Fury, and of course, it had a dragon. One who had been kind enough to kill everything else that had been there before I arrived. He was not, however, kind enough to allow me to enter, grab the things I wanted and leave. So, a short time later, after it was dead and its knowledge mine, including, not surprisingly, the knowledge of air I needed for the shout, I departed, now looking for the location mentioned in Catria's journal. The map seemed to indicate a river that came from the west, and the site being either on the south shore of that river or perhaps spanning the river. The drawing was good enough that I found the river itself and then started following it west, avoiding any of the local Forsworn or wildlife. The Forsworn because I did not wish to lead them to anything valuable, and the wildlife because that would be just inconvenient. After a few hours coursing both shores, I found a bridge spanning the river that was unmistakably Dwemer. This, then, is where truth becomes stranger than fiction. I found the piece of the Aetherium key, but it was in the open, with no protections of any kind. Apparently, it has always been like this as well, which means that, somehow, over the course of centuries, or even millennia, not once has anyone ever actually looked at the pedestal. Either that, or it was seen and somehow dismissed as more rubble, which I find very hard to believe. It is now in my possession, however, so how it came to be is a very academic question. Though I wish to continue searching for this key, the other areas to check are now significantly out of my way. Lord Harkin may be patient, but I would not want to test that patience. So against my better judgment, I will be heading for Winterhold and the college, to inquire if they have any knowledge of the location of any Elder Scrolls. Many hours later, in the College of Winterhold, I was told that the best person to ask about anything book-related, for I was reluctant to bring up the scrolls themselves, was the Arcanium's librarian, an Orzamer tyrant who held books to be more important than a student's life. I found the Orzamer, Urag, with ease. He was the one who stopped me as I entered, lectured me about the library being his own personal realm of oblivion, and then told me that he'd sooner kill me than see me harm any books. So his reputation is understated. When I was finally pinned down as to what I was looking for, he was, understandably, stunned. He even claimed that, if they had one, he wouldn't show it to anyone like me. I don't care to trade on my names or titles, but I felt now was the time to bring up being Dragonborn, which changed his attitude completely. He brought me what they had, not much, but one of them was so incomprehensible that it fascinated me. Though it made little sense, it also made a great deal of sense. I asked Urag about it, and he nodded. Septimus, the author, was a modern author and a member of the college. He also happened to have not checked in some time now, last thought to be living out on the ice floes to the north of the city. A thin lead, but the only one I had. I thanked him, yes, I can show courtesy, and then departed the college. Even though the cold could not really hurt me as it once could when I was mortal, I would be a liar to say it was pleasant. The winds of the Sea of Ghosts are cold in a way that no other winds truly seem to be, and wandering around in those winds, standing on ice, getting one's feet wet, while searching for a person who may or may not even be out here, did little for my mood. Nor did my continuing ruminations on what I had seen in Markarth. The more I thought on it, the more I realized that I was not free, that I was not serving myself and my own interests at all. It had certainly felt that way, the power, the nigh invulnerability. It all made one feel as if I were breaking free of others' expectations and desires. The reality was that I was doing more work for others than myself. This hunt for the scrolls did little for me, only for Lord Harkin. I had traded one set of chains and expectations for another. I had stepped into it willingly, I grant, but that did not mean I could not step back out again. Somehow. My thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a cave-side entrance, built into a small island spire in the middle of the sea. Inside was a crazy old man and a massive cube-shaped structure of what appeared to be Dwemer design. The cube, though interesting in its own right, was not why I was here. I spoke to the old man and found him to be the Septimus that I was seeking, and even his speech was as meandering and sly as the book he'd written. Unlike the book, however, I could understand the general meaning he was trying to convey. He wants an Elder Scroll as well, so is willing to help me find one provided I bring it back here to him afterwards. Simple enough to ignore later, so I accepted his offer. There is, somewhere beneath Skyrim, a Dwemer ruin that contains the scroll. This much I had already known from Lord Harkin. Septimus gave me a point of entry and a kind of roadmap. Enter the ruin of Alftund, go to its deepest depths, and there I will find another passage locked to all but someone who knows how to open it, using a Dwemer tuning sphere. This will allow me entrance to a place he calls Blackreach, and going through this place will lead me to a smaller Dwemer ruin, one he calls a Sky Dome, where the Elder Scroll can be found. The second object he gave me, what he calls a lexicon, can then be used to transfer the knowledge of the Elder Scrolls safely. I bring back the lexicon, I have my Elder Scroll, and we both walk away having met our goals. If this Blackreach is as large as it sounds, I may be beneath the surface of the province for days. Maybe even weeks, though I will hope not. Alftend is, among those who lust after Dwemer knowledge, a well-known site. Not because it is a trove of artifacts or knowledge, but because nobody has really managed to get into it. The Tower of Alftend stands in the middle of the glacial region of Winterhold, a lift-seeming device in the center. I say it seems to be a lift because no one has ever gotten to it. 4 dense metal grates prevent entry. There looks to be a lever in it, but nothing has been able to switch that lever yet. Not magic, not force, nor even bigger levers from the outside. How then was I supposed to get in? The answer lay in nature, as it turns out. A small camp had been set up and abandoned here, but there was a wooden scaffold that ran off a cliff to one side, following the ice wall down some 60 feet below the original ice surface, where a new crack in the ice had revealed an entrance to the site. Or so I presume. It is Dwemer architecture, and the direction is correct. I walked into Alftend, where few had gone before. The entrance region was empty, apart from a distant Khajiit voice who was screaming at itself over skooma, it sounded like. Since the pathways led away from the voice, I consider it to be unimportant. The path split several times, but those paths were all blocked, either by cave-ins, ice walls, or, in one case, a Dwemer spike door. Or at least that's what I'm calling it. A door made of massive metal spiked poles that come from one side of the entry and block it off completely. Whoever the group was that set up camp above, they were stuck in here for some time. They write of a blizzard coming in and forcing them to shelter in here. I have seen no sign of them so far, apart from one journal from the expedition leader that gave no more than what I had more or less guessed. The initial area turned around almost completely, and I found myself back in a mixture of ice and Dwemer technology. I recognized one area as being the opposite side of a path I'd already trod, the place where I had heard the Khajiit voice. Not far along I found the owner of the voice. He was sharp enough to realize I was there, and his ramblings told me the eventual fate of the expedition, no matter what else I might read. He was the last. All the others were either dead or missing, and presumed so. The Khajiit also assumed that, since I wasn't one of the people that had been trapped here with him, that I must have been the one to steal his skooma. He attacked, and this time I had no choice but to defend myself. I can't even stand the thought of skooma. It makes the belly bleed, I hear. The other ruins I have been in attributed to the Dwemer were nothing compared to this. Pipes everywhere, working creations in multiple variations, pistons, steam, heat. This is no dead site, though the Dwemer who once controlled it are long since vanished, of course. Were they to reappear suddenly, I don't think it would take them long to get this place doing whatever it was supposed to be doing. Despite the activity, though, there is little sign of anything living down here. Even the traces of the last group who was trapped here seems to have sputtered out with the Khajiit and his brother, now several hours behind me. Actually, now that I think on it, I'm not really sure how I'm telling time down here. It could be easy enough to lose track with nothing to compare with. I'll do my best to keep the days more or less centered, but as time goes on, that will become more and more difficult. Further on, and it began to be clearer what had likely happened to the last expedition. I found a few Falmer armor pieces that looked relatively recently made, and Falmer in a Dwemer ruin is hardly surprising. What was surprising was just how deep this ruin seems to go. Yes, Septimus had told me to go to its deepest reaches, and that Blackreach would be even deeper still, but this... I think I've gone further down than I did when I dropped through the floor of Kagranzel. Then I entered a giant, empty, vertical shaft surrounded by ice, and looked down to see that in some ways I had yet to even scratch the surface of what Alfthand had to offer. 12 Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. It was a long and slow descent, the safest kind if you think on it. On every level, there were new foes to evade, kill, or otherwise overcome. Dwemer constructs patrolled the narrow walkways, as did the occasional Falmer. I found the remains of 2 more of the last group about halfway down, and their journals make their fate clear. Captured in their sleep. Some of them were already dead when they tried to escape, to make a break for the surface. None of them made it. 3/4 of the way down the shaft, and the path went in a new direction, leading me into the heart of the Falmer city here. Dozens of them heard each other die, tried to stop the force that was marching through their midst. But despite their best efforts, all died. This city is now dead in truth. If there are survivors, I heard no indication of them. Finally, the path branched. One seemed to go deeper still, the other led to a lift, one that, I suspect, leads back to the surface, possibly the original Alftan Tower. I will go upward to check this, unlock it if need be, and then return to the depths. The lift hadn't led back to the surface. It almost did, but no. Instead, it ended just on the far side of a Dwemer spike door, the same one I'd seen yesterday on my initial entry to Alftand. No wonder they'd all been captured so easily. They had all but camped on the Falmer front door. Coming in the night, or when one was alone, would have been simple, and with the door only operating from their side, there was no way for them to pursue even if they knew what they were looking for. As for the survivors, they'd run the wrong way. Right when they should have gone left. Tragic, in its way, but Skyrim and Tamriel have never been kind to the unprepared. I simply hope at this point that I am not one of them. Continuing down, I soon reached the bottom of the ice shaft and saw the door into the next section of the ruin. I was hoping I was done with down for the moment, or, at least, that the potential descent was not quite as vertical. The room that I crept into was simply massive. I'd seen a few on this scale, most recently in Arkandang's, but this was impressive in a way that none of the others had been. This place was in one piece. That meant that in addition to more Falmer and more of the Dwemer automata, there were bound to be more things that could, and would, kill the unwary. The upper deck, though, that was what I was suddenly afraid of most. With that many gates, that many ways in or out, I'd had the markings of a defensive death trap, a place to delay and kill intruders without risk to the inhabitants. I'd not had to face a working Dwemer Centurion before, but I've seen their broken remains. Those are not something I would want to face. And I think I may soon have that distinct pleasure. I was right about the defensive nature of the setup. As soon as I stepped into it, I saw 2 of the Centurions. One was already destroyed, lying in pieces. The other was not. Now, it may shock you to learn that I know a few things about lockpicking. Not much, but enough to have gotten by on the, let's say the leaner times in Windhelm, when the people were being particularly stingy, or the curses thrown at me and others in the Grey Quarter were particularly harsh. I would visit a few homes, pick the front doors, and help myself to some contributions. Why bring this up? Well, I noticed in those days that if you were sloppy, the lockpick might break and get stuck in the lock in such a way as to break the lock itself, made it impossible for the internal workings to turn, twist, and so forth. I made use of this once or twice to have an even more subtle revenge on those idiots in Windhelm, but more to the point, I also noticed that the Centurions have a few places where gears are exposed. I took a chance, and instead of running away, I charged the machine, slid between and under its legs. I came up near one of those exposed areas and jammed my pick into it as hard as I could manage, and hoped. It actually worked. The machine froze in place, allowing me to hack it into pieces. I'm hoping it's not some kind of fluke, that I could repeat the feat if needed. I also hope I never need to find out. I walked to the top of the stairs to see what was being so heavily defended. The room contained, somehow, the final 2 survivors of the doomed expedition. They are no longer survivors, as they killed each other just as I was arriving. I heard the argument in their voices, the shouts, and then, just as I appeared, their death rattles. A poor end to a poor group of explorers. They were literally feet from escaping and proclaiming their discovery. I suppose that means I'll get credit for it, build the reputation of the Dragonborn a little. More interesting to me, though, was that the former Legionnaire had another attunement sphere on him, giving me 2 to work with. The table-like object in the center had an indentation in it, and I was tempted to put one of the spheres in that receptacle immediately. But the thought of going up to the surface, offloading some equipment and minor riches, and sending them to the museum before I went deeper, that seemed like the smarter play. I emerged into a blizzard, probably not unlike the one that ultimately doomed the original exploration party. My horse, however, had remained where I placed it, making it possible to survive the weather and return to Winterhold. It was slow going between the weather and the sheer amount of things I was bringing out with me, but the museum, I knew, would be the better for it, which meant I would be the better for it. And if the horse looked at me with a seeming question in its face as I mounted, well, the horse will survive it. 2 hours later, I had returned to Alfdund. It occurred to me, only after I was already back on the lift descending into the ruins, that I could likely have made the trip far more pleasantly if I had used the clear skies shout that the Greybeards had taught me. But it was already too late. I mentally shrugged and continued on. Back at the table, I inserted the sphere. The floor rattled, there was a grinding noise, and the floor nearly dropped out from underneath me. A new staircase had formed, which meant I now had a way to go even deeper beneath the surface. Exactly as Septimus had said I would, and as I now somewhat was afraid to do. On the other hand, I won't be in the sun. I descended the stairs, went through a door, then a small corridor, and when I emerged from that corridor... gods. I'd thought some of the Dwemer ruin areas were vast, but this... I have no words. A hugely expansive single cave, its ceiling, lost to view above, filled with the largest mushrooms I've ever seen. Even the ones on Solstheim and in Morrowind were never described to me as being this big. This place should have been pitch black, yet somehow the mushrooms were creating enough light that I was able to see well enough to navigate. Alfdund took me near a full 24 hours to fully explore. This place could well take more than that, and still have barely shown me any of its secrets. I can only assume that this is the Blackreach that Septimus told me to seek. Somewhere down here is the Sky Dome I am seeking. If only I had some idea of which way to go to look for it. I chose a direction, as they are all more or less equal to me at the moment, and began a slow and careful exploration. The lighting was good enough that maintaining a sense of direction wasn't overly hard, though I was making careful notes about the landmarks I was seeing, and there were far more of them than I'd believed. The mushrooms would have been good enough, I think, but this cavern is littered with Dwemer-made landmarks as well, everything from towers to Centurion wait stations to what looked like combat arenas. If I get lost down here, it will be because I am not paying close enough attention. There is also some new species of nirnroot that grows down here. A red one. I'm not certain what its properties are, but I look forward to seeing if it can be something useful in the future. A ruined building put me onto these. An old alchemist called Sendarian was down here, somehow, working on learning more of them. A name for someone in the rift was also mentioned, someone who can carry on the dead man's work. If they can get these growing above ground, that might give me near-exclusive access to these. 13 Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. This may be the closest thing that still remains that might be called an intact Dwemer city. Not only have I not seen its like before, which is an obvious statement, but I've never heard of anything even remotely like this. The lighting of the entire cavern, minus a few glowing bits of fungus or lichen, seems to originate from this mechanical sun. The work it must have taken to create the thing, let alone somehow hang it from the cavern ceiling, boggles the mind. I had thought this would be the place a sky dome might be found. Such was not to be the case, however. Apart from the Falmer and, strangely, a group of more recognizable men and mer races who seemed to be willingly serving them, there was little to this city that was of real note. I'm sure those who study the past would find all kinds of fault with my statement, but my knowledge is limited to the bow, the blade, and the skills to use them. Though I have good landmarks, it is hard to figure out which way is north or south. And trying to find portions of the cavern I have yet to explore, it makes it more difficult to not get turned around. Indeed, thrice I have turned a corner only to find the giant Dwemer sun ahead of me, though I could have sworn it was behind me only moments before. Eventually I made it to what I will for my own sanity call the south end of the cave, where I have discovered that the cave drops several hundred feet straight down. The waters that ran above all fall into and gather here. This made it ideal for locating more of those odd crimson nirnroots, and is now the one portion of the cave I have yet to map out in my mind. I tried doing so on paper, but the moisture in the air kept resulting in me putting holes into it while trying to pen it. Hopefully I'll have a good enough memory to pen something decent when I return to the surface. Then again, will I even need to return here again to need such a map? I found several lifts as I explored. One of them only gave me a more elevated view of the entire cavern, and though it was mostly lost in the darkness beyond the few lights there were, the view was quite breathtaking. Another actually led to the surface. The nameplate near the lift read Raldbathar, which, if I recall correctly, is somewhere in Eastmarch. I thought to look around and better confirm this, but the large dragon I saw flying in the region made me reconsider. At last, I could see only one last place I hadn't explored. When I saw the nameplate, I knew this to be the place. In the dark, the Tower Mazark, Septimus had said, and this place was, in fact, called Mazark. Though there is still one small area I've yet to go through, I feel my examination of this cavern has gone on long enough. I have jobs to complete, and digging around in an ancient cavern is not one of them. The room that followed was a small campsite of sorts, though there was no sign of the one who had set it up originally. The door, however, led to another massive room. At first I couldn't tell what I was looking at, but imagine a giant ball had its top quarter cut off to make a flat platform, and then set into a large room with just enough room for a small corridor to wind around it, and you'll get the general picture of what was done here. Then there was what was built on top of that platform, and words cannot describe it. Rings, crystals, spider-like appendages, and delicate casings were everywhere. I had no idea what I was looking at. But when I looked at the ceiling, I had a better guess of where I was. The ceiling was a dome, which meant this was likely the Sky Dome that Septimus had sent me to locate. There was an arching platform along one side of the machine that had what looked like controls of some kind. One of them had an indentation that looked like the cube that had been given me would fit into, and placing that cube in it made the machine come to life. 2 buttons were working, and pressing them sent various pieces of the machine whirling and twisting around the center. Playing with it, I saw it was manipulating the light coming in from above the dome, reflecting it in various directions. I began to see the pattern in it, and suddenly a 3rd button came to life and allowed me to move the giant crystals, again manipulating the light. Then a 4th button. And eventually I had reflected the light from the ceiling through a large crystal at the center of the machine and then to the cube, which glowed blue for a few moments before the entire thing reset itself. Which is when I realized it wasn't a giant crystal at the center. It was a crystal container holding something else entirely. I slowly walked down from the platform after grabbing the cube. I only knew what I was looking at because I had seen one once before, on Sorana's back when I had awoken her. An Elder Scroll. The one that Lord Harkin had said was lost in the depths of a Dwemer ruin. He wasn't wrong. It was here, and I could feel its power, see it almost radiating from its casing. This object scared me, I will not lie. The power of these scrolls are known only in legend. On the other hand, Sorana had one on her back for thousands of years, and so far as I know, suffered no ill effects for it. So long as I keep my curiosity in check and use it only when I must, I should be able to do the same. It is not the scroll itself that is harmful. It is the knowledge within it. I'm hoping that there is a quicker way out of this ruin than the way I came in, though. I do not desire to spend another few days away from open sky. A lift was not far from the room the scroll had been contained in, and stepping once more into the dusk, I looked out across the landscape to determine where in Skyrim I had emerged. A few moments and I had it. I was high in the mountains in the southern part of the Pale, a few miles south and several thousand feet above Fort Dunstad. I took a moment to enjoy the first breeze I had felt in days. Though the sun hurt, it was also a fair bit better of a sight than the constant darkness I had just emerged from. Something about that thought seemed to scream at me, as if it were important somehow. I ignored it and planned my upcoming travel. First, I needed to get the cube to Septimus. It is useless to me as I can't access the information he believes to be in it. I have the scroll, which is all I needed from this, and this also means passing near Alftand so I can pick up my horse. Bit of a distance to walk, but I have walked far further. From there, I have some options. I have one of the 2 scrolls I was sent to locate, and Sorana has the lead on the other back at Castle Volkihar. I've also had increasing problems, however, with cultists on the road. Boethian ones. One of them had a book indicating that Boethia's center of worship isn't far from Windhelm, so as I'll be relatively close by, I may choose to drop by and give them the best advice they may ever get. Leave me alone, or perish. The Nightgate Inn, and a drop-off point for the museum, more importantly, was along the way. I stopped in for a quick drink and to lighten my load significantly. While I was enjoying the drink, however, a bit of luck dropped into my lap. I overheard an argument between the innkeeper and another patron about a chest that the patron had found but hadn't been able to open. This got my attention, though it wasn't until the patron described the chest that I truly got interested. I'd seen such chests before, ones that housed pieces of the Crusaders' armor. I thought for a moment, then called the innkeeper over and whispered in his ear for a moment. He thought about my proposal, shrugged, and then nodded. With his backing, I got the patron's attention and proposed a bet with him. I would wager 500 septums against the contents of the chest that I could open it in less than a minute. The wager was made loudly enough that the entire room got very interested in the bet. After a moment, the patron agreed. We all went into the basement where the chest was currently sitting. The other patrons were making bets against me. The innkeeper, on my suggestion, was betting for me, meaning I was about to make him a lot of money. I made a small show of it, had the patron show that it was locked, that there was no keyhole, all of the things needed to show that this wasn't a scam of some kind. Once he was satisfied, he checked me for lockpicks, fair enough, and then had one of the other patrons time the minute. When it clicked open just before he counted 5, and I pulled out the shield of the Crusader, there were 2 sets of groans. The chest's owner groaned because he knew that whatever I'd just gotten was worth more than 500 septums. The crowd all groaned because they'd lost their wager. The innkeeper is now one of my closest friends, for some reason. I crossed the pass into the glacial drifts, collected my horse, and made my way back to this ice cave of Septimus. The conversation was incredibly short. He took the cube, looked at it for mere moments, and exclaimed it would take much study before he could open it. He thanked me, I think, and then said if he needed more assistance he would contact me, and then walked away as if I didn't exist. I departed the cave unsure if I even existed in that old man's world.